Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and Serial Killer September continues in week 3 here, and we are talking about the Toolbox Killers today, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. Kind of a unique story in this sense because it was a pair and they worked together, and that's just not something that normally happens, right? We had Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. That's probably the other famous serial killer duo. A few others had used accomplices here and there during their murder spree, but it was either just for one murder or like they had multiple accomplices for different ones and all that. But typically, a lot of serial killers just work alone, and obviously it's easier because if you have someone with you, you're probably paranoid that they're going to snitch on you, and then you have to kill them. And then if someone sees you kill them, then you got to kill all the people that saw you kill that guy, and it becomes a mess. So that's why it's usually alone. And that's why this story is a little bit unique, and we are going to jump into it right now. So this, because we're talking about two different people working together, the kind of the framework for how I tell this story is going to be a little bit different. Not super different, but basically we're going to talk about each of these men's lives up until their paths cross in prison. So we'll start with Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker, who was born on September 27th, 1940, to some parents who didn't actually want kids. They quickly gave him up for adoption, and he was taken in by the Bittaker family. So Bittaker was not his biological birth name. He was adopted by the Bittaker family. And although Lawrence was smart, he had a registered IQ of 138, which is up there. He didn't enjoy school. He never really found it challenging. It was boring. And I get that as someone who, I don't know what my IQ is, but yeah, I was super bored in school because it wasn't challenging. So instead, he spent most of his time just kind of committing petty crimes. And after spending a year in a California Youth Authority detention center, Lawrence learned that his adopted family had then disowned him and then moved out of the area. So now he's left totally alone. After spending a year, he's arrested for these crimes. He spends a year in a detention center, and then his adopted family is just like, we're done. And that's got to be a lot easier than like your biological family doing it, right? Because like you have no real connection to this kid. And so he's being a little turd, gets arrested. And so it's a lot easier to just cut those ties with him, even if you've raised him his entire life. But a few days after his release from the detention center, Lawrence was arrested in Oklahoma for transporting a stolen vehicle across state lines. He was given an 18-month sentence, and then after his release from that, he went right back to committing crimes. And so here's what I like so far about this story. He's been detained, he's been locked away twice, and he has served the full sentence, which is rare in these stories. They always get out early, it seems like. Although he was given a 15-year robbery sentence in California, he was released on parole after just 2 years. So, well, there goes that out the window. So much for serving the full sentence. Now, that's crazy though, right? Where it's like, he's already been incarcerated twice. And then California was just like, he gets to the actual California prison system and they're just like, we don't want to deal with that. Let him go somewhere else. We'll parole him. It's fine. A year later, Lawrence was back in prison after he violated his parole, and this time he was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. 2 independent psychiatrists classified Lawrence as a borderline psychopath who was highly manipulative and completely unable to acknowledge the consequences of his actions, which, how do you let that person back out into society, right? And I think, I think it's not that he couldn't, it's not that he lacked the ability to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. I think he just didn't care. I think he thought that he was so smart because he has the IQ of 138. And I think he thought he was just so smart that there were just like, he could talk himself out of any kind of wrongdoing, at least, from his perspective, whether it's ethically, morale wise, whatever it is. He was just so smart that, the consequences of the illegal things that he was doing just did not bother him because he was reframing it in a different way. He was prescribed some antipsychotic medication, and then he was released from prison again. Why? Why are you doing this? This is why, like, I just have no respect for California as a state whatsoever. Very pretty, great scenery, full of idiots. And it's like, this guy's clearly a danger to society. He is, like, psychiatrists calling him, they said borderline psychopath. He's a clear psychopath. And just, trying to give him some medication and then releasing him back out into the wild. Not the way to go. Not the way to go. And shockingly, he was arrested again in 1967 for theft. He's 27 at this time. He was only given a 5-year sentence, and then he was released after 3 years. Guess what happened? The next year, he was arrested for burglary, this time given a 15-year sentence, but only served another 3 years. It's almost as if California doesn't have a firm grasp on how the justice system and the prison system is supposed to work, right? Like, someone who has served, I think, what is this, like 5 different prison sentences so far, maybe even more. And whether it's 5 years, 15 years, whatever it is, make them serve the whole sentence. Especially, like, I can understand maybe releasing him early the first couple of times, right? Like, if he's on good behavior, maybe he's really demonstrating that he's rehabilitated. But like the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th time he's sent to prison, make him serve the whole sentence. It's not hard. It's not, we have overcrowding. I don't care. Throw him in a janitor's closet. He clearly sucks at being a human being. You can't let him go free. Well, shockingly enough, after stabbing a grocery store employee over a steak, Lawrence was arrested again, and he was sent to the California Men's Colony, an all-male prison in San Luis Obispo. And so we will pause Lawrence's story right here and talk about Roy Lewis Norris, who was born on February 5th, 1948, to a couple who they did want a kid, but they were not equipped to take care of one. So kind of a different situation than Lawrence Bittaker. But his parents, Roy's parents could not take care of him. They couldn't afford it. They were just all over the place. And so Roy bounced around various foster homes in the Colorado area and often went long periods without food and proper clothing. After being sexually abused by a Hispanic family that was fostering him, Roy permanently moved back in with his birth parents. When he was 16, Roy visited a female relative's house and began trying to make moves on her. Gross. And then when the relative, it's not clear if it was like a cousin or like even maybe his aunt or whatever. But when the relative told Roy's father what happened, he threatened to beat him completely, so just within an inch of his life. And in response, Roy stole his father's car, drove up into the Rocky Mountains, and actually attempted suicide by pumping air directly into his arteries, which you can't do that. That'll kill you. If you didn't know. When Roy, obviously it didn't work. And so Roy, this is funny to me. Like he doesn't just continue running away at this point. He just kind of like gives up and he's all defeated. And he goes back home where his parents informed him that they did not want him around anymore. So very strong parenting in this episode. Parents very quick to just get rid of their kids. And this clearly does not work. This does not end well for those kids. So after being disowned by his parents, Roy joined the Navy and was sent down to San Diego. And then after serving a tour of duty in Vietnam, he was then arrested back in the States for rape and assault. Military doctors diagnosed him with a severe schizoid personality disorder and gave him an honorable discharge. So he still got the rape and assault charges, but he posts bail. He's out free. And while out on bail, Roy, it's almost as if also the people in California, not even just authorities, but just people don't understand what they're supposed to do or not do. Because while he's out on bail, Roy stalked and attacked a female student on the San Diego State University campus. He was given a 5-year sentence in prison, but he was sent to the Atascadero State Hospital, where he was classified as a mentally disordered sex offender. On the bright side, though, he did serve this full 5-year sentence. So good job, California. You got one. On the downside, doctors deemed him at the end of his 5 years, they deemed him, quote, no further danger to others, which we all know is never actually the case in these sorts of things. 3 months later, shockingly, Roy attacked a woman, dragged her into some bushes, and raped her. Although the woman couldn't fully identify Roy, he was eventually arrested a year later for the rape and was sent to the California Men's Colony, where he officially met Lawrence Bittaker in 1977. So now our timelines have converged, and now we're on to the full story. Roy initially taught Lawrence how to make jewelry, and after that, the two struck up a really strong friendship in prison. The friendship grew even stronger after Lawrence ended up saving Roy from 2 different attacks by other inmates in the prison, and then it became even stronger when they both found out that they were just super into really violent sex and just hating women. It's like, I don't even know how that conversation starts, right? Like, you're supposed to sitting in the prison yard. It's just like, hey, Roy. Yeah. You hate women? Yeah, I do. Don't like them at all. Yeah. What you prefer to do to them? I like choking them. I like smacking them. Smacking them, hearing them scream is really cool. Man, I love doing that too. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, you like to kill him? I ain't never done. I bet that's cool. Yeah, I bet it is too. Right? I don't know if that's what they sounded like or not, but like these two dinglings, just not. I mean, what else are you gonna do? What else are you gonna talk about in prison, right? Well, as time went on, as they're both serving their sentences, the two talked about what their plans would be once their sentences were up, or whenever they got released early, because that was probably going to happen. Eventually, they came up with this genius plan to murder one girl for each teenage year. So essentially, they were going to murder 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 7 girls each in each age. So they were each going to murder a 13-year-old, a 14, you get it, right? Although they were going to end up being released at different times, just based on when they got there, what their sentences were, they vowed to reunite when they were both free and then launch their plan. Lawrence was released on October 15th, 1978, and moved down to Los Angeles, where he began endearing himself to the local teenagers in his neighborhood by always having beer and weed readily available at the motel where he lived. And here's the thing. Teenagers, if you are listening to this, don't trust a dude living in a motel. I don't care what his story is. He's not in a good place in life. And if he's offering you beer and weed, he definitely has some things going on. And you shouldn't be involved in that, right? But whatever. Roy ended up being released 3 months later and moved in with his mother in Redondo Beach. So I guess Roy's parents changed their mind and decided they wanted him back in their lives. And then finally, the two met back up in February of 1979, Roy and Lawrence, and they decided to launch their plan. Lawrence started the little mission by purchasing a 1977 GMC cargo van and nicknamed it the Murder Mac. which is pretty cool. Like, it's like, hey, Roy, yeah, I got us a car we gonna go kill them girls with. Nice. What is it? Got me a 77 GMC. Calling it the Murder Mac. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I might just be talking to myself in those voices for the rest of the day. They're not even great voices. I'm just having too much fun with it. Over the next 4 months, these two dingbats cruise the streets, picking up over 20 women hitchhiking along the road, because this was a time when people still did that, and they still hadn't figured out that that's how you get murdered. To their credit, though, these two guys never assaulted any of those 20 women, instead choosing rather to kind of use them as practice runs in order to find secluded locations to ultimately take their victims. So this is really, like, they're actually being pretty smart about this, if, you know, in terms of like planning a murder spree. They're neither one of them clearly know how to murder someone effectively yet. They've just been raping people. Haven't been good at that either in terms of getting away with it. So now they're being smart. Now they're trying to plan things out. And so they ultimately find an old fire road up in the San Gabriel Mountains. And Lawrence actually ended up replacing the lock on the gate with one of his own, and deemed that this would be their secret hideout / dumping ground. And so on June 24th, 1979, Roy and Lawrence dragged 16-year-old Lucinda Schaefer into their van, mostly because coercing her into the van as they had originally planned to do didn't work. And I thought that was funny, right? Like, they spend a couple of months picking up all these hitchhikers, and all of these women just get into their van all willy-nilly, no problem at all. And then the first girl that they try to actually do this officially with, she's like, no, I'm okay. And so then they just grab her and throw her in there. On the way out, as they're traveling down the highway, Lawrence turns the radio up on full blast while Roy ties Lucinda up in the back of the van. They drive to their secluded spot up in the San Gabriel Mountains, where Lawrence and Roy just took turns raping this girl. Once they were done, Roy tried to strangle her to death. And so, like, he's on top of her, he's strangling her, but then he looks right into this girl's eyes. And for whatever reason, the way that she looked back at him was just too much for Roy. And he jumps off of her, runs out of the van, and just starts vomiting all over the place. So Lawrence, he's got to go in. He finishes strangling her to death. And once she was dead, the two wrapped her body in a shower curtain and threw her down into a canyon. 2 weeks later, Lawrence and Roy took 18-year-old Andrea Hall. I don't know why I had struggle with that name. 18-year-old Andrea Hall into the mountains, where they raped her and then stabbed her brain with an ice pick. What? Oh God. I don't know if you've ever screwed around with an ice pick. Those things are sharp. Like, I don't think I've ever had a sharper utensil in my, I don't have one now. My parents had one in their utensil drawer. And every time I would just prick my finger with that while like rummaging around for something else, always hurt more than like any other knife or fork that we had. It was insane. So yeah, to stab someone in the brain, not just in the head, in the brain, that tells me that they stabbed this girl so hard that the whatever's on the ice pick, the sharp parts, went through her skull and into her brain, because that's how sharp these things are. In September, 13-year-old Jacqueline Lamp and 15-year-old Jackie Gilliam were raped and murdered with ice picks and a sledgehammer. A sledgehammer! Here's the thing, guys. This is what I respect about what these guys are doing. They're not just shooting people. They're not just strangling people. They are getting jiggy with it and using some fun items. Fun, probably not the right word. Unique, right? Unique. Ice pick murder? Super cool. Cool. Still not the right word. I feel like I'm coming off as a little bit too supportive of what these guys are doing, and I don't mean to. This is just, they're going about it a little differently, and I respect that, because I think a lot of these serial killers, they do it the same every single time. It gets repetitive. You get to a point after like the 12th murder where it's like, okay, we get it. He strangled him again, and then he jerked off all over him. Okay, it's lost its appeal now. And so, like, I don't know. It's interesting. But finally, on Halloween, 16-year-old Shirley Ledford was raped and strangled with a wire coat hanger. But unlike the other bodies, which were thrown out into the wilderness in a canyon or whatever, Lawrence and Roy actually left Shirley's body on someone's front lawn in a neighborhood so that it could be found, right? So at this point, all right, we have a 16-year-old, we have an 18-year-old, a 13-year-old, and then another 16-year-old, so whatever, she doesn't count. So we have 3 of the 7 ages. Well, actually, no, 16 does count because they each were going to do it. So 16's fully taken care of, and then we got a 13 and an 18-year-old crossed off their list. The next month, Lawrence actually reconnected with a guy named Joseph Jackson, who was a former inmate at the men's colony where Lawrence and Roy had met. He tells Jackson what he had been up to, probably trying to recruit him, just being like, hey, Joseph, we've been killing some teenage girls, stabbing them with ice picks and such. You wanna get in on this? It's fun. We got the whole hideout and everything. And Joseph's like, I'm actually a good person. I don't want to go back to prison. I'm not really interested in this. And so Jackson literally goes to his attorney and tells him about this. And I don't know, maybe Jackson's not the smartest guy, because he asks his attorney what he should do. And probably the logical side of me wants to think that, he goes to his attorney and is like, bro, should I tell authorities? Should I just forget all of this ever happened? But part of me really wants me to believe that he goes to his attorney and he's like, hey, so one of my old prison buddies comes to me. He wants me to join his little murder group and go kill teenage girls. And I kind of want to. It sounds fun. Do you think I should do it? I don't know. I'm very conflicted because if it goes wrong, I go back to prison and I don't really want to. I don't know, man. What would you do? But that's probably not what he did. But God, I hope he did. I really hope he did. That would be so funny. Well, of course, the attorney tells him to go to the police with that information, so that's what he did. Less than 3 weeks later, police had connected Lawrence and Roy to several disappearances of teenage girls in the area, and they placed Roy under surveillance. After watching him sell some weed to a group of teenagers, police jumped in and arrested Roy for a parole violation. He was then arrested at his motel home a short time later. As he's hauled off, police then search the rape van. They find the sledgehammer, a jar of Vaseline, 2 necklaces belonging to the victims, and a tape recording of Shirley Ledford actually being raped. They haven't released that, probably for good reason. Investigators also found nearly 500 Polaroid pictures of girls in various stages of torture. 4 months later, Roy Norris confessed to all of the murders and then agreed to testify against Lawrence in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. So Roy was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison, while Lawrence was in fact given the death penalty. However, he died in prison before he was executed on December 13th, 2019. Roy Norris died on February 24th, 2020 in prison. And one other note, the prosecutor, Stephen Kay, at Lawrence's trial actually committed suicide in December of 1987. And in his suicide note, he actually cited Lawrence and Roy's murders and the stress and trauma of actually having to listen to that tape recording of Shirley Ledford's torture and rape as basically the reason why he ended up killing himself. All right, the Toolbox Killers in the books, and kind of a bummer ending. Like, I don't know, for some reason, like, death always sad, but like for some reason when the serial killers die at the end of the story, it's like, cool, that was great, awesome. But then it's like, oh, the prosecutor killed himself because all of the gruesome evidence and trauma from trying to do that. That's kind of sad, but whatever. Let's see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Sorry, that whatever at the end there seemed very flippant, and that's not how I meant. Anyway, all right. You know what? I've backed myself into a lot of corners on this episode, so just going to pretend like none of that happened, and we're going to keep going. All right, here's what we learned. Number 1, California sucks when it comes to keeping people in prison for the time that they send people to prison for. Number 2, ice pick in the brain. That's so metal. Again, I don't mean to sound so excited over it. That's like some Rob Zombie horror movie level uniqueness of that. Anyway, you know what? I'm not even going to do number 3. I feel bad that I have misrepresented myself in this episode. Next week on Our Weird World, we are going to Jacksonville, Florida. Just why? Because there's apparently been a lot of serial killers in Jacksonville, Florida. For some reason, I don't know why, but probably because Florida. So we're going to look at the stories of Paul John Knowles, Gary Ray Bowles, Paul DeRosso, and James Latham. I don't know what's going on in Jacksonville. That seems to be the question that we need to answer. So we will do that next week as we wrap up Serial Killer September. Thank you for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird. I grew up in a batten board cabin at the dead end of a gravel street. No, you didn't. I got my first paying job when I turned 10 because money didn't grow on trees. No, you didn't. Cheap cigarettes with the windows up was just part of the air I breathed. No, it wasn't. I didn't choose the redneck life. The redneck life chose me. I love that, boys. Yeah, me and my daddy built my first car. No, you didn't. Strung the motor up in a tree. We wore the beer box helmets with the eyes cut out, rat racing them junkyard dreams. No, you didn't. Yeah, me and my crew, man, we grew up on Hank Jr. 83. No, you didn't. I didn't choose the redneck life. No, the redneck life chose me. Now, I grew up swimming in cut-off jeans down at the bridge at the Castor Creek. No, you didn't. We bent our half bills as far as we could bend them. We spent the fall sitting high in a tree. Yeah, hunting and fishing wasn't just a trend. It was what we did to eat. I didn't choose the redneck life. The redneck life chose me. Yeah, I didn't choose the redneck life. The redneck life chose me. What you see is what you get, and what you get is what you see. Brilliant songwriting. I'd take a Mountain Dew over a silver spoon any old day of the week. I didn't choose the redneck life. The redneck life chose me.